Hasidism in general was founded by the Baal Shem Tov. I don't know when I got all these buttons here. Okay. Hasidism was founded by the Baal Shem Tov and then expounded upon somewhat by his successor, known as the Maggid of Mizrich, who became sort of like the personal teacher of the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shlomo Zalman Liadi, the author of tonight's work, of the Tanya itself. The Alter Rebbe himself did not grow up as a chassid, ironically. Okay, and it took him time, and this was sort of somewhat divinely orchestrated for him to find, quote unquote, himself, the path of Hasidic teaching and the like, as opposed to sort of being led to it or saying, here, you're going to this yeshiva and this is what you're going to study, etc. The Alter Rebbe was recognized at the very youngest of ages as a child prodigy, had a tremendous mind, phenomenal understanding, even at the youngest of ages. At the age of bar mitzvah, he's already expounding on some intricate parts of the Torah and the like. And at the age of 25-6, he was charged by his teacher, the Maggid of Mizrich, known as the Mizrich Maggid, to actually author what's known as the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Code of Jewish Law, that was in a sense rewritten, so to speak, by the Alter Rebbe. The original Code of Jewish Law was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo about 500 years ago. The Alter Rebbe was charged with taking it and putting it into a very concise, as possible, form, as well as like a very authoritative rulings, as opposed to like just four opinions and this, like this one says that, and that one says this. The Alter Rebbe took it all, and this is the halacha, this is the law, this is the law, etc. It is considered to be a monumental work. And perhaps ironically, he was from the youngest of the students of the Maggid Mizrich, which was a bit quizzical to many of the other students. It's like, why would you give this to the youngest? You give it, guy's 25 years old. You're not, I mean, this work is beyond the pale of anybody, and yet the youngest, or of the youngest of the students got it, and that was the Alter Rebbe. And it wasn't until later on that after he written the halachic work and perhaps some of the more ethical elements of Torah, that he authored the Tanya. So the Tanya took the Alter Rebbe about 20 years to write. I don't know how many of you have ever written a book, but 20 years is a long time to write a book. Why did it take him 20 years? So largely because the Alter Rebbe was very, very careful that there should not be even an extra letter, let alone word, in the Tanya itself. Very punctilious in terms of every nuance and iota within Tanya. And it was written and rewritten, etc., to make sure it was me as perfect as possible. What is the premise of Tanya? So Tanya is known in the Chabad circles as the written Torah of Chassidut, of Chabad Chassidut. As you have, for example, the written Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, and the oral tradition would be that of the Mishnah, the Talmud, Code of Jewish Law, etc. Tanya is known as the written Torah, sort of like the Bible of the Chabad philosophy, upon which there's been a tremendous amount of extrapolation by the various rebbes to the tune of thousands and thousands of discourses and talks that were given based on many of the principles brought down in Tanya. Why was Tanya written? Why did the Alter Rebbe decide to write a Tanya, which is the seminal work, which was kind of out of the box? He got a lot of flack for writing it. He was arrested ultimately and sat in jail because he was accused of all kinds of libelous things. Spiritually speaking, it's known the reason he sat in prison, incidentally, for 53 days, to parallel the 53 chapters at the beginning of Tanya, was because he took the greatest secrets of the celestial abode above and brought it down and made it readily available to all of mankind, which was bucking the trend, certainly by all means in its time. So the Alter Rebbe did this for a number of reasons. One in particular is that he would be consulted regularly by many of his adherents and followers with all kinds of questions, whether they were philosophical questions, Jewish law questions, or ethical, moral, family, whatever it may have been, counseling. At some point, the Alter Rebbe could only meet with so many people. It's only 24 hours in a day. And these Hasidim were scattered all over time, like Eastern Europe, Russia predominantly. The Alter Rebbe took much of sort of the advice that he would give people in various forms and began to formulate it into what we know today as the Tanya, various sections of Tanya. Tanya is, I see you have your 10 questions Tanya seeks to answer. There's many more questions that it seeks to answer beyond what's on this page. They're not all answered in one chapter, okay? So Tanya is written in a very structured way, in which Alter Rebbe sort of lays the groundwork for the two consciousness that exists for the first, I think, was it 7 or so chapters, the two levels of consciousness that exist within the Jew, which is that of the animal soul and the godly soul, which we'll learn more about, interplay between the two of them, How does that relate to God? How does it relate to me perfecting myself and my own struggles, whether they be that of anxiety and depression and the like, and they're all addressed in the Tanya itself. We got to be patient. So the first chapter in particular, which we'll get to shortly, sort of helps to lay the groundwork. It leaves us with a number of questions. There are questions asked in chapter 1 which are not answered until chapters 12 and chapter 17 and further on to get the proper answer to them. But they all do get answered, but it's all a kind of a buildup, almost like a crescendo. By the time you're finished, you finally get the big picture of everything, and also all the pieces of the puzzle start to fit in. Just anecdotally, if you have questions in general, while I'm going through this, feel free to ask, because there's a lot to digest, a lot to unpack. I'm going to do my utmost to make it as simplistic as possible in simple terminology, which is maybe oversimplified, but nonetheless, Tanya is, on one hand, very deep and can be very difficult. Parts of it are very difficult, very mystical and hard to understand. On the other hand, it's written for everybody. So the Tanya itself is actually based on one verse from the book of Deuteronomy. It is the verse of Ki karov elacha hadarim ma'od beficha ubevavcha lasos. It means Ki karov elacha, it is near to you, close to you. Hadavar ma'od, the thing, quote unquote, very much, which means basically your relationship to God. Beficha, in your mouth, ubevavcha, you sit next to the teacher. Ubevavcha, and in your heart, lasoisoi, to do it. Meaning that every Jewish person has the wherewithal. It's near to them. It's something which is accessible to be able to bring about a connection between themselves and God. The three expressions of beficha in your mouth, babaf in your heart, lasaisai, parallel, as we're going to learn a little later on in Tanya, the three garments of the soul. Remember, the soul is a spiritual entity. It doesn't have physical arms, legs, etc. So the three what are called garments of the soul are your thought, speech, and action. So using your thought, speech, and action, you're able, in a sense, to connect to God. It's close to you. It's attainable, that every Jewish person can reach it. It's that verse that the entire Tanya, not just these 53 chapters, but there's more beyond that, are all based essentially on this idea. And as Dr. Rebbe puts it, there is a longer, shorter way to get there, or a shorter, longer way to get there. It's not just a game of semantics. What's the difference between a longer, shorter way and a shorter, longer way? There's actually a space on the story from the Talmud, seeing as Rabbi Yeshua, who came to a crossroads in Jerusalem and saw a young child and asked him, how do I get to where I'm going in Yerushalayim? So he told him, well, there's a longer, shorter way, and there's a shorter, longer way. Which one do you want? He said, I want the shorter, longer way. He wanted to get there quickly. So he told him to go whatever way it may have been. And he took the shorter way only to find out that at some point, the shorter way ended like in a field. It couldn't get him past certain barriers to get to where he needed to go. He was much closer, but he couldn't get any further. So he came back to the kid and said, why'd you send me this way? He said, you wanted the shorter, longer way. The longer, shorter way is a longer route, but it'll get you there more quickly. So in essence, the Alter Rebbe really teaches us to focus more so of serving God through the longer, shorter way. There's no easy street. Bottom line is, anything good, as you know, in life takes work and takes practice. It's nothing for free in this world. And the same thing applies with our relationship with God, with dealing with our own emotions and our own psyche, etc. It takes work, it takes a lot of work. As the old saying goes, in various modalities of therapies, you got to do the work, okay? Whether your person's in whatever type of therapy you may be, AA, what have you, you got to do the work. You can't just wish it's going to happen. It doesn't happen that way. And it certainly doesn't happen spiritually either. So we're going to go through the longer, shorter way, which, just to give you a brief description, really emphasizes more so thinking deeply about the concept of godliness, meditation, and the like. The shorter, longer way, just to give you a heads up, is by using what's called the innate love that every Jewish person has for God. Now, although there are some Jews that say they don't believe in God, what have you, and I've said this many times, Jews make lousy atheists. We're not good at it. This is the bottom line. We can proclaim to be agnostics, atheists, what have you, and as the old saying goes, there are no atheists in foxholes, so as long as it's convenient, it's good. After it's not convenient, then all right, maybe it could be something, I don't want to call it God because that would be uncomfortable, but some other higher being, higher power, whatever word works for you. But every one of us has an innate and inbred. We're born with this level of love. It's a latent or concealed level of love to God that we have. That's the shorter, longer way because it's there already. You don't have to do anything in the sense to get it. You have to bring it out, but it's there. The longer, shorter way is working hard on your love and fear of God, which doesn't necessarily come naturally. There's not just primal fear, but there's like awe, which is a much higher level of fear. There's fear like, you're afraid of the dark, the boogeyman, the rain, whatever it is. That's a very low level of fear of God. Awe, on the other hand, is a much greater level of serving Hashem, which we'll get into as we move through the text itself. So the Tanya was actually first printed in 1796. Gives you an idea as to how long ago it was written. It may sound, well, it's a book from hundreds of years ago. I mean, today psychology must be far more advanced than whatever they knew hundreds of years ago. And the answer is no, it's not. In fact, actually, much of what you read in contemporary psychological, whatever it is, literature in the last 100, 200 years was largely predated by the Alter Rebbe, and perhaps even sooner. Now, did the Alter Rebbe make all this up on his own? Like, did he just have an epiphany one day and say, I'm going to write a Tanya, I'm having a revelation? Where did it come from? So the Alter Rebbe, in perhaps extreme modesty, titles his book, well, we know it as Tanya, and I'll get to that name in a minute, but it's also called Likutei Amorim. It may be on the cover. It may not be on this cover, but on the other covers it is. Likutei Amorim means a collection of sayings. And what the Alter Rebbe's means of saying, I'm not making anything up new on my own. All I'm doing is it's a collaborative, it's a collection of various other authors and teachers, and I'm kind of just putting it all together in some sort of a format which is more digestible, etc. To some degree, that's true in his own words, and he writes that he quotes from, for example, Chaim Vital was perhaps one of the most famous students of the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Holy Lion, lived about 500 years ago, perhaps one of the most famous Kabbalists in the last 1,000 years. Okay, so Chaim Vital, who authored a book called Eitz Chaim or Pri Eitz Chaim, is quoted extensively in the Tanya by name. Other ones are the Shalosh and Luchas Habris of Rabbi Horowitz, who lived in I think it was the 17th century. And then he quotes also from the Maharal of Prague, if you've ever heard of him. He was another great rabbi from Prague, all again predating the Alter Rebbe. So he says, he quotes from Pisfar and Pisefrim, from books and from authors, from sort of from hearsay. The people he heard things from, quote unquote, although he didn't hear it necessarily directly, were those largely of the Bach, who he only really met once in his life as a little child, about the age of 3, not knowing who the Baal Shem Tov was. And also his teacher, the Maggid Mizrich. So he doesn't attribute any of this to himself as being novel. I'm just taking, what's already there and kind of putting it all together. Now, for me to say it's false humility would probably be sacrilegious. The Alter Rebbe writes this about himself. But on the other hand, there's certainly novelty that the Alter Rebbe has come up with on his own based on these various quotations and others. He mentions the Rambam, Maimonides, amongst many of the other philosophers, the Kuzari, not mentioned by name, but many of the other rabbis, Alevi, and other works that are alluded to within the composition of the Tanya. There are a number, I'm not going to go through them, it's just too much, but basically there's a number of letters of recommendation that the Alter Rebbe got from some of his contemporaries and the like, as well as the approbations. There was actually a ban placed on publishing the Tanya from the initial publication, which was in a place called Slavita in Russia in 1796. There was a ban from anyone else publishing it for 5 years because there were people who intentionally would change some of the wording in the Tanya, basically to make the Alter Rebbe look bad, basically, and create libels about him. So there was a ban, literally called the Cherem, to the extent that they would be excommunicated Jewishly if they did it. And that's, you find this in the introductory letters, etc. The Alter Rebbe, it was all put into place for that reason. The Alter Rebbe, ironically, did not write the Tanya with the intention of having it published. Why, I don't know. Like, he himself didn't publish the Code of Jewish Law, published later by his son, etc. Many of the answers, the responsa, or what's called the epistles in English, which means letters of the Alter Rebbe, were written in little, they called them bichlach in Yiddish, like little pamphlets. And this is how they got circulated by hand. They're all rewritten by hand. That's how they got circulated around Russia before they were published. And invariably, obviously, people who are constantly copying and recopying, they're going to have mistakes and more mistakes and more mistakes, some intentional, some not intentional. And because of that, the Alter Rebbe will ultimately acquiesced to having the Tanya published formally, as it was, as we have it today, although it was published in various sections. This is the first 52 chapters, known as this collection of sayings that I was speaking about. One other name that the Tanya is known by is called the Sefer Shel Beinanim, the Book of the Intermediaries. Well, we're going to learn about shortly what exactly is an intermediary. What is that supposed to mean? It's like somewhere, well, you would simply imply it's somewhere down the middle of the road. But what is that road and what does it mean to be down the middle of the road? And lastly, Tanya. So Tanya itself actually is the first word in the book called Tanya. The word Tanya itself means that we learn in a brisa. For those of you who study some Talmud, I've got a Talmud class. So what predates the Talmud is out of the Mishnah. The oral tradition was originally codified in the form of the Mishnah by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Judah the Prince. And then the Talmud came about some 300, 400, 500 years later, over some time. There were parts of the Talmud that were written in the Mishnaic period, but not published in the Mishnah. Okay, they were called the Brisa. So Tanya means we learn in a Braita. In other words, it was something which really kind of predates the Talmud itself, but was actually mentioned. It's written in the Talmud, not written in the Mishnah. Follow? If not, there's more scotch. Okay. So we'll start out just from the beginning of it. I'm going to read the text itself and explain it as we go along. I'm at the beginning of the chapter 1, which is on page 27, for anybody who has the book and wants to follow along. Tanya b'Sefer Gimel Dinida. We study it in a brisa, this section, from the end of the 3rd chapter in the Tractate of Nida, in the Talmud, it says that every Jewish soul, before it comes down to this physical world, is made to take an oath. It has to swear. What is it going to swear to God? To heat tzaddik, that it will be righteous, a tzaddik. The al to heat rasha, and it will not be wicked. It's a twofold oath, two sides to it. A, you'll be absolutely righteous, and that you will not become wicked. Now you're going to say, talk about false promises. I mean, I wasn't even around yet, and I'm ready. My first oath was not even true. That doesn't look good, right? I mean, why would God want every soul to make this oath? It seems almost, it's like, it's fruitless, because I don't know how many people you know that are absolutely righteous, never sin. I don't know a lot of them, short of the people sitting here, but I mean, outside of that. So why take that oath, for starters? Hold on to that question. And then he says, and even if the entire world tells you that you are a tzaddik, they say, like every mother tells their child, you're an absolute angel. Okay. You're an absolute tzaddik in your own estimation. In your own eyes, you should visualize yourself as a wicked person. So it says in the Talmud. This got a lot of problems to it. So, yeah, I mean, okay, it's nice that the whole world tells me, you're great, you're awesome, you're a tzaddik, you like almost walk on water. Jewishly, that is, okay? Wrong holiday, probably wrong analogy, but anyway. But nonetheless, in my own estimation, I should view myself as a wicked person. Now, what's the problem with me walking around viewing myself as a wicked person? So the Rebbe says, but we have to understand, how does this jive? We learn in Ethics of Our Fathers in chapter 2. You should not view yourself as a wicked person, in direct contradiction to what I just stated from the Talmud. And if you view yourself as being wicked, what's going to happen? You're going to become despondent. You're going to walk around like, if you see people, I'm a nothing, I'm wicked, and the old Jewish joke is, who are you to say you're nothing? That kind of thing. But it's not a healthy thing to walk around thinking I'm wicked. At some point, you're going to start, losing it. So that's not a good idea. Not only that, it says that you will not be able to serve God with joy and with happiness and a joyous heart, which is the way we're meant to serve God. Then he says, on the other hand, if I think I'm God's gift to mankind, and I'm really a tzaddik, and I can never do wrong, as my mother used to think, she never thought that, but anyway, in theory, so then I am more likely to become lax in my own service to God. Analogy that I've given my thoughts to kids, what have you. It's not brought down by the Alter Rebbe, and this is not Torah from Sinai, okay? Just an analogy. Let's assume that you are in great physical shape and you decide to join the Navy SEALs. You've heard of the Navy SEALs? Okay. Or in Israel, Shayet Shosh Esrei, these are like the creme de la creme. One of the most difficult parts of the military to get in. Now, even if you get accepted, and the acceptance rate is very low, the graduation rate is even lower. So I think it's the last week in training or buds training, they call it what they call Hell Week. Okay, and they sleep an aggregate of, I don't remember, 8 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours. I mean, over a whole week. You're eating next to nothing. You're constantly being exercised to death. You're laying down in the cold surf with water coming up your nose for hour after hour, schlepping heavy logs and rafts on your head. They train right here in the San Diego area, okay? Many of them. So, and often the ones who actually make it through, who graduate, which is a small percentage, are not the strongest of them. They're not the biggest guys coming in there. Some of them look skinnier. So what gives? I mean, don't you think that the strongest of them all is somehow going to be able to endure this absolute anguishing pain that they go through for a week? The answer is no, right? It's all up here more than anything else. It's the mind. Mind tells me I can do this, no pain, block out the pain, etc. So let's assume you graduated from the Navy SEALs and the person is deployed in a part of, I don't know, SEAL Team 6 or whatever it may be. Okay, and they're the best, let's say, from the best the United States has, and they're sent out to whatever mission it may be. Now, these guys are highly trained with every known weapon that the United States has, okay? Stuff that we don't know about. And they're trained to do the most dangerous of missions, many of them covert. When are they most, in a sense, susceptible, God forbid, to being hurt, or God forbid, worse? Let's say they're on a mission. When are they most susceptible to, God forbid, either getting killed in the worst circumstances or at the very least getting seriously injured? The moment they let their guard down. You might think, I'm the best of the best. I'm a Navy SEAL. Navy SEALs don't make mistakes. At least we don't admit to make mistakes, right? And we're trained to we operate like a machine. The moment their guard comes down thinking they're infallible, that they can't make a mistake, they're most apt, God forbid, to get seriously injured. That's an extreme example, but we can use it in our own lives in our own way. So in essence, what is it telling us here? That if a person thinks they're God's gift to mankind, I'm an absolute tzaddik, I can do no wrong. So then, the moment I think that my evil inclination is never going to get the best of me, rest assured, it's a matter of time. So your guard comes down a little bit and bam, there it is. And you're like, I can't believe I did that. What was I thinking? Or what was I not thinking? Etc. No matter how good, ethical, moral, tzaddik-like, whatever it is the person may be. So going back to the original question. So the first part of it tells us that we're meant to take this oath. Why are we even taking this oath? So I'm going to jump ahead a number of chapters. It doesn't get to the answer right here, but just to give you, so you don't have a cliffhanger all night long and wondering, why did I take that oath? So the answer, simply speaking, is that as we all know, when God creates us and puts us into this physical world, we have a daily struggle between we'll see shortly, the animal soul, the godly soul, and the tug of war. And as I've said in shul many times, at the moment your eyes open up in the morning, the first thing that happens is good morning, Vietnam. The war is on. Okay, get up, don't get up. Go to shul, don't go to shul. Daven, don't daven. Do the mitzvah, don't do the mitzvah. Keep kosher, not keep kosher. It's like a whole day. Okay, it's back and forth and back, and it's like, okay. I mean, how many of these can I do? I'm doing my best. Give me some time. Give me some space. This is what it is. It's a daily war, right? And we all undergo this daily war. And we know how difficult it is not to listen to that little voice that we know is telling us the wrong thing to do. But I'm passionate about it, and I have passion, and I have lust, and I have desires, and that's what Yom Kippur's for. God will understand. You know what I'm saying? A couple faux pas here and there. Maybe I can buy a mulligan. God will forgive me. Whatever it is. However, we rationalize sinning at that time. Only I will know. No one else knows. No one got hurt in the process of this sin. Whatever it is. So we know how hard it is to control that. How do we control that? So the answer is it's that oath we took. When we made that promise, now God knows good and well that we're not all going to be tzaddikim throughout our entire lives. Not likely to happen. But by making that oath, it actually gives the strength to the human being for the next 120 years, God willing, to be able to overcome that desire, that passion for sin. As difficult as it may be. Because otherwise, the evil inclination is that strong that odds are we'd never win. But we made this oath that we're going to be a tzaddik and not wicked. It's both of them. And now somehow I have the juice. I have the tools, if I want to use them, to be able to overcome those tests. That's just a little tidbit and answer, which comes on a number of chapters later. All right, now the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss different types of people. I don't mean fat, skinny, handsome and not so handsome. What is different kinds of people? So the Talmud actually discusses 5 classifications of people, of Jews in particular. It says, on the bottom of page 28, for those who are following along. Or 29, actually, sorry, in the bottom. There are 5 different groupings of people. Number 1 is Sadik V'Toivloi Tzadik V'Raloi. One is what's called a Tzadik V'Toivloi, and it is good for him. Okay, life is good, so to speak. And we'll see what that means shortly. Rosh Tzadik V'Raloi, a Tzadik who life is not that good for him. There's some evil in it. Rosh V'Toivloi, a wicked person that has some good as well. A Rosh V'Raloi, and an absolute or abject wicked person. And the last one is Beinani, the intermediate or the intermediary, as this book sort of focuses in on. So what does the Talmud say? Pishu B'Gemara, Tzadik V'Toivloi Tzadik Gomer. What is a tzaddik? A tzaddik meaning a righteous person. V'Toivloi, and it is good to whom it is good. What does that mean? It means a complete tzaddik, absolute tzaddik. Tzaddik V'Raloi, a tzaddik to whom it is bad, means that tzaddik she'eino gomer, an incomplete tzaddik. He's not 100% a tzaddik, not 100% righteous. Now in the Zohar was authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's like considered to be the seminal work on Jewish mysticism, going back like 2,000 years. Please shut your phones in the middle of the class. Well, the odds of me remembering to turn it back off, vibrate, are not good, but nonetheless. If anybody else calls me tomorrow. Okay, that's okay. You can wait. Byron have a passion Shpatim Perish and Ryan Mehemna, which is part of the Zohar. In the Torah portion Mishpatim, which comes from the book of Exodus, it explains as follows. Tzadik v'ra'aloi sharashu by kaf. What does it mean? The term tzaddik, righteous, implies that I'm righteous and not wicked. How can you be half righteous or mostly righteous? Either you're righteous or you're not righteous. Like either you're pregnant or not pregnant. You can't be half pregnant or 3/4 pregnant. So what is this righteous that has some evil to him? It seems to be almost like a contradiction of terms. So the Talmud explains it is not. The Zohar explains it as a tzaddik to whom his evil is completely subjugated. It literally translates as bent over to, but basically subjugated to the good. Should I jump ahead here? Yeah, why not? Okay, so just to give you an idea what that means, he's going to explain it more at length later on in Tanya. What that means, simply speaking, is as follows. That in reality, as we'll see, a true tzaddik is a person who has no evil inclination left anymore. They actually took their evil inclination and completely transformed it into this good side. So if you were to visualize your heart sort of divided, there's a right ventricle and left ventricle. As we'll learn about a little later on in Tanya, that the right ventricle is where the godly soul resides together with the brain, and the animal soul, where your passions and lust, what have you, resides in the left side of the heart, the left ventricle, which is part of the heart that pumps blood and sustains the entire body. Okay, so in a true tzaddik, they've taken their evil inclination and completely transformed it to good. The example would be, as we'll see a little later on in Tanya, was that of King David. King David, if you read the book of Psalms, to a large degree, it's almost like a biography of his struggles. You know, life wasn't easy for him. He went through an awful lot to get to where whom he eventually became. And in it, the Alter Rebbe, and he brings out a particular verse where it says, "V'libi chol b'kirbi." King David says of himself that my heart is empty inside of me. What is that supposed to mean? So it's explained that that means that he basically conquered, he killed, so to speak, his Yetzer Hara's evil inclination, and therefore his heart, the left side, left ventricle, which was the side of the passion and what have you, is gone. And he became a consummate, complete tzaddik. He wasn't born as such, but he worked on himself so much to that degree that he was able to completely transform the evil, which is an extremely high level of serving God, but to transform the evil into good. So he brings down now from the Talmud. Gemara said, "Practice bracha sadikim yistev sheitim kuli risham yisrael sheitim b'neim zev zev sheitim." So until now, I was explaining to you what the Zohar says, a more esoteric, mystical explanation. But now back to the Talmud, which is not esoteric in nature. He says that what are tzaddikim, righteous people? Those are people who are ruled by their good inclination. Evil people are ruled by their evil inclination. And the Beinani, sort of the intermediary, is kind of half-half, right? Something like this, something like that. That would be the simple explanation as to what a Beinani, the intermediate, is. Why, and you'll see shortly why all this focus on the Beinani. The book is called the Book of the Beinanim. Because in reality, few, if any, people in the world will ever become a true tzaddik. It's almost nearly impossible. Because the souls that were given by given to us by God, are not souls that have that ability to become a complete tzaddik. Few people like Moshe Rabbeinu was a complete tzaddik. There's some other great leaders, but the vast majority of Jews cannot. What we can, at least in potential, become is this Beinoni, this intermediate, which we'll see shortly is nothing to sneeze at either. Okay, it's not like, I can be half good and half bad. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm good. And Thursday, Friday, Shabbat. That's not what it's talking about. Okay, so he says, Omar Rabbah. Rabbah, who was a famous Talmudist, says the following about himself. He was a great scholar and a great, really, truly righteous man. He says, based on what the Talmud says, that's the case, I am a Beinoni, I'm this intermediate. So his contemporary, Abaye, says to him, he says, if you're a Beinoni, then we're all wicked people. I mean, compared to you, you're like head and shoulders above us. And if that's the case, we're like dead people, because it says, that wicked people are like dead people. They're void of any good, of any mitzvot, etc. So you basically wiped out the world. If that's all you are as a Beinoni, we got no chance. That was his response. So it says in the Talmud, Lahavan calls there. Should put on my glasses. I can read what I'm saying. Okay, Lahavan calls there. Bar Hativ Gam Lahav Mashroiv Babas Perakav Ben Shalom Bas Tzadikim Mashro Sarm Chuli Basak Bash Leikama. So the Talmud tells us, he brings down from the book of Job. You heard of Job? He went through some hard times. Okay, so it quotes from the book of Job, where Job writes that God created righteous people, God created wicked people, but God didn't predestine who's going to be righteous, who's going to be wicked. Why couldn't God predestine who's going to be what? Exactly. You wouldn't have premature choice otherwise. Otherwise, if a person is destined to be wicked and they sin, God can't have any complaints. They're just doing what they're created to do, right? So he says, now we have to understand what does it mean when Job said he created tzaddikim, righteous people? He created wicked people, but he didn't predestine who's going to be what? We'll see the answer a little more at length later on, but basically God created the potential for both, is what it means. Potentially, we can all be good people. We can potentially be not such good people. So now we need to understand what is the essence of the Beinoni. And again, remember, most of the focus of this book is going to be about that intermediate, because as I said, in potential, every one of us can get there with tremendous amount of hard work, but we have the ability. Obviously, a Beinoni can't be half good deeds and half bad. That doesn't make sense. I mean, Rabbah, he was not a jokester. He wasn't a stand-up comic. Get up, say, "Oh, by the way, I'm a Beinoni." I mean, he was serious about what he said. And if that's the case, then Beinoni can't just be someone who's half good, half bad. It would make no sense whatsoever. Otherwise, how would Rabbah have made the mistake to say that he was this Beinoni, this intermediate? It is known regarding Rabbah that the angel of death had no dominion over him, couldn't take him when his time came. Why? Because his lips never stopped, never ceased from saying words of Torah. He was constantly saying words of Torah. He was so holy that he never stopped learning Torah, to the extent that the angel of death couldn't even take him when he was supposed to go. Eventually, it happened, obviously. So he was that holy, and yet he proclaimed himself to be a Beinoni. So now, ostensibly, a Beinoni obviously is not the half good, half bad. I mean, there's got to be some special, really special human being. And how do I even relate to that? I'm not Rabbah, okay? And my lips have not completely ceased yet. I mean, so I have not continuously said only words of Torah my life, my entire life. Now the author brings down, he kind of strengthens the position in which the Beinoni obviously can't be half and half good, half bad. Why? Because the moment a person sins, at that time, they're called a wicked person. They're called a Rasha when they sinned. But if afterwards you repented, then you can become technically a completely righteous tzaddik, righteous person. But it takes doing teshuvah. But until that teshuvah, that repentance is done, the person is called a Rasha, a wicked person. But now he goes even further. He's going to give us a few scenarios in which a person will be titled a wicked person. It's not that hard. Become wicked, that is, okay? Make a Rasha. Person may say, all right, listen, I got it. If I transgress any of the Big Ten, Ten Commandments, and I'm wicked. All right. I mean, maybe God can understand me a little better, but I got it. Okay, so I can't worship idols, and I got to honor my parents and Shabbos, whatever it may be. No adultery, idolatry, etc. But how about like a rabbinical commandment? Like not even a major harsh, transgression. Something a little more lighter, so to speak. Is that so terrible? So the observer writes that even when a person transgresses one of those rabbinical ones that are not from the big major severe ones, at that time they're also called a rush. They're also called wicked. It's gonna make you feel good about yourself. It's not too late to start drinking now. Right. He gives another scenario. So he says, in the first chapter of the Tractate of Nida, if you have a person who has an opportunity to rebuke a fellow man or to stop someone else from sinning, and you don't protest, literally, so then you're also called a rasha. Even if you didn't sin, you just didn't protest someone else sinning. You didn't say anything, so to speak, then you're also labeled at that point a rasha, wicked person. And all the more so when a person neglects to fulfill a positive commandment, of which there's 248, and they don't do it. An example cited would be like, for example, to study Torah. Specifically for a man, men in particular are enjoined with the mitzvah of studying Torah day and night. Now, granted, you have to work for a living, which is fine, but the premise behind it is so that you're better able to serve God. The reason women are not mandated to study all this is because, generally speaking, they're the ones going to be helping to raise the family, raising kids, etc., and creating the household. And physically speaking, you can't. That takes more. That's a full-time job and change in and of itself. So therefore, they don't have that same mandate. There are laws that women have to study that are specifically germane to them beyond anything else. So, but someone who doesn't do that, they're just basically killing time. Okay, they're surfing the net or whatever it is, or channel surfing, etc. Instead of studying Torah, they're just watching whatever it is. That's a waste of time. So regarding that type of a person, the sages of blessed memory have said that person is made an abomination of God's word, and they should be cut off, excision. Pretty harsh, don't you think? I mean, most of us on any given day are guilty of this multiple times daily. So, it's pretty sobering. I mean, I'm not really up in the big leagues. I'm not even in the minor leagues at this point. I'm like a walking Russia, day in, day out, right? So it's understood that when a person neglects to fulfill a positive commandment, they're more wicked, so to speak, I guess quantitatively, than if they transgress a sort of a light prohibition of the rabbis themselves and not biblical in nature. So he says, so if that's the case, and obviously the Beinoni, the intermediate, doesn't even have the sin of wasting time of not studying Torah. Even that, which it says that most people are not saved from on a daily basis. Everybody wastes some time. So to be the Beinoni, the intermediate, you're not the Russia. You couldn't even waste time whatsoever. You couldn't exist. And because of this, Rabbah, who again was the man whose lips never stopped saying words of Torah, made the mistake, quote unquote, of thinking he's a Beinoni because he never wasted time. He said words of Torah day in, day out, all day long. So therefore, he figured if that's the case, then I guess I'm a Beinoni. I mean, I'm not a Russia, I'm not sinning, but it makes sense to him. So there's a Haggah, if you're following along, a footnote on page 30, I think that says 33. I'm aging gracefully here. Yeah, page 33. So there's a footnote that was written by the author. It discusses a statement in the Zohar which appears to contradict the conclusion we just had here, that neither the in-betweener nor the tzaddik are ever guilty of transgression. This conclusion that a tzaddik is never guilty of transgression, I'm just going to read it here, appears to contradict what is written in the Zohar, that any tzaddik, any righteous person who has few transgressions, again, here's the key, few transgressions, atones for them through suffering in this world so he can fully merit the afterlife. How could that be? If you sin, you're no longer a tzaddik. How does a tzaddik have few transgressions? So either you are or you're not. You can't be a tzaddik, complete tzaddik, and have a couple of errors on the side. It doesn't work that way. So he says that Tanya will answer that while such a statement does appear in the Zohar, it represents an incorrect presumption of one of the sages, Rav Hamnuna. That was, he shares Rav Hamnuna Leo. This actually was a question posed by Rav Hamnuna, sage, and was answered correctly by Elijah the prophet. Rav Hamnuna asked Elijah, doesn't the title a tzaddik who is bad refer to a man who suffers in this world to atone for his few transgressions so that he can fully merit the afterlife? And the Rav Hamnuna and Elijah's answer to him is this represents a figurative, imprecise use of the terms. Sorry, no, I skipped it. Elio's answer corrected Rav Hamnuna, saying that the meaning of tzaddik who has it bad is not one who suffers for his own transgressions in this world, but one who atones in this world for the transgression of others. Bottom line is, he's explaining to him that a tzaddik doesn't sin, and there are tzaddikim, righteous people, that physically suffer. We see that, and have suffered. So why are they suffering? If they're such righteous people, that's why God pays them back for being righteous by suffering, physically, illnesses, or whatever it may be. Horrible deaths we read about on Yom Kippur with the 10 martyrs and more. So the answer is their suffering is not on account of their own sin. I know this sounds like a different religion who believes that someone else died for their sins, etc. And you can sin as much as you want because he died for our sins, so I'm good. You know what I'm saying? I'm living the fast lane. We got this first, okay? Now, they kind of bastardized the whole idea. There's no confusion there, okay? The Shivim Hamla Torah, it's explained that openly there are 70 faces, 70 means of understanding every concept in Torah. In reality, they're not really contradictory one to the next. To you and I, they may seem contradictory, but when you get to a greater level of understanding, you'll be able to see that even though, let's say, the classic arguments in the Mishnah or Talmud are between Hillel and Shammai. The house of Hillel, the house of Shammai. We may have seen quoted extensively in the Fathers and other places. Perhaps one of the most famous ones is that when it comes to holiday of Hanukkah, according to the house of Hillel, we start with lighting one candle the first night, two the second, third, fourth, etc., to 8. According to the house of Shammai, you start with 8 the first night, and then you work your ways down to 1 for the 8th night. Now, obviously, we follow the house of Hillel, correct? Does that mean that the house of Shammai is wrong? Because you can't do both. It's either or. So, although they seem like blatant contradictions to you and I, it's explained that on a greater spiritual level, Shammai is right, although his opinion will not be held and upheld, I should say, until Mashiach comes. Once the world is completely purified from whatever evil exists here with the coming of Mashiach, we will rule like that of the house of Shammai. But we currently, in today's feeble Jewish world that it is incapable of keeping the stringencies of the house of Shammai, and Hillel was always known to be more lenient in general, and therefore for today's world, that's why we rule like that. But it's not that Shammai's wrong. He's wrong for us today here. But on a great spiritual level, he was correct. It's just one example. So there are 70 different facets of understanding everything, in case you thought you mastered it today. I'm going to put that to bed. All right. So that's basically the footnote. I'm going to have a little more coffee before it's completely cold. Pretty close. Okay, so what's the story then when we talk about a person who is considered to be a tzaddik? When we said that when a person's half and half, they're called the Beinanin, intermediary. A tzaddik, and a person who has more merits than non-merit, more good deeds than bad ones, it's called a tzaddik, initially as we understood it. So what does that mean? It means it's called a Shem HaMushalin Schava. Okay, so for example, if a person goes to court, okay, and they have a court case, and ultimately the judge rules in favor of that person, does that mean that that person is a tzaddik? Not necessarily. They might have been right in that particular case, but they could have been completely horrible people outside of that, right? But that's not what the case was all about. So the term that's used, that's commonly used, sort of in a more colloquial way, oh, you're such a tzaddik, you're such a righteous person, is what's called a borrowed term. In other words, I'm not going to call you wicked. I don't mean that you're a complete tzaddik, you have no sins whatsoever. When it comes to reward and punishment, overall, for the vast majority of your life, you're pretty decent. You know what I'm saying? You're a moral you got you're an ethical person, etc. Not to say you don't foul up, but overall, you're a good guy or a good woman, whatever the story may be. That's how it's used loosely, but that's not really, in reality, what a true tzaddik is. Shema Teva Mao Shaminus Madugas Halukas Sadiq Benim Amrazat Sadiq Mesej Shave Tam Shemra Bli B'chol B'kirbi Shalom Yitzhak Yog B'Tainus. Okay, so and I mentioned this to you earlier, but when it comes to the true understanding and meaning of the word tzaddik, like that of King David, remember we said that King David said regarding himself, "My heart is empty inside of me." You'll see it next time you read the Book of Psalms. Pay attention. That means that it's the way it actually is put is that he actually killed, quote unquote, his evil inclination by profuse fasting. Why do we fast in general? Tomorrow happens to be a fast day, incidentally, the 10th day of Tavis. Why do we fast in general? Why do we have prescribed fast in the Jewish calendar? Because they act as a form of atonement. Now, granted, most people, when they fast today, you try your utmost not to get a headache, not to spend your whole day in bed, whatever it's going to be, and somehow be semi-functional and a contributor to society during the fast day, which is easier said than done. Most people don't relish Yom Kippur. Like, yeah, I can't wait for Yom Kippur. I love Yom Kippur. You don't hear that a whole lot, right? Most people say, I can't wait until Yom Kippur is over because then life will start. Sukkot. Now, that I can deal with. Yom Kippur, a lot of pages to read, and the whole davening, I'm looking, another 168. How's he going to finish all this in the next 3 hours? You know, we're counting pages and wondering how it's all going to happen. Well, why are we fasting? Because fasting acts as a means in the sense of abstaining from the physical. The premise is to focus on the spiritual. Well, so although today we have enough fasts with the prescribed fasts, but historically, in the times of King David and even later, the righteous people would fast profusely. I mean, it could be fasting sometimes 100 fasts or more a year to basically deaden any passion, any physical connection to the world as much as possible. I mean, they maybe eat at night, whatever it is. It's basically to get rid of all of your passion, all of your connection to the material, and sort of become almost to a degree somewhat of an ascetic. Okay? So in this case of David, and that's not for today's generation, it's not. In case you haven't figured that out yet, don't get any wrong ideas. You want to do what they call intermittent fasting for whatever reason, be my guest. But that's not what he's talking about here. So ultimately, King David did this, and that's how he got rid of his evil inclination. He became a complete tzaddik because he got rid of his evil inclination. So, but anyone else who did not reach that level, which is basically 99.999% of the rest of the world, even though you have more good elements to you than evil elements to you, still in all, you are not on the level of a tzaddik at all. So if that's currently on your business card and you don't fit, then get new cards. So therefore, the sages of blessed memory have said, brought down from the Midrash, God saw that there were not going to be a lot of tzaddikim throughout history. God saw. I mean, God created them, obviously, but whatever that means. So God saw that really is not going to be a whole lot of really righteous, uber righteous people. So what did he do? He dispersed them throughout all the generations. One here, and maybe another generation or two later, another one there. But there's not like groups of them, bunches of them floating around. Because few of any of us are ever going to be able to reach that level. As it said, the tzaddik said, Elon, that a tzaddik, a righteous person, is considered to be the foundation of the world. We talk about our Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, who, in my humble estimation, for what that's worth, was definitely a tzaddik. I mean, certainly when we became Rebbe, as close to any tzaddik anything that the tzaddik-esque that we'll ever know in this world. So, what does that mean? He's the foundation of the world. In other words, that there is this person, whoever it may be, in this generation or last generations, upon whom basically the whole world rests on that person's shoulders. Okay, that's a lot of responsibility, awful lot of responsibility. And it's not shared by a group of 20. You know what I mean? It's like that tzaddik is the foundation of the world. Obviously, it comes along with tremendous responsibility, but also at the same time, you have this bond with God that's unparalleled to anyone else in the world. So you remember I mentioned before that part of Tanya is based on the student of the Arizal, Rabbi Chaim Vital. So this is the first quote from him. It says, so now the Alter Rebbe is going to get into this, the consciousness, the dual consciousness that exists within every Jewish person. Every Jewish person is created with two souls. What is the Jewish soul called in Hebrew? The term I'm sure many of you know. Neshama, right? Does a non-Jew have a neshama?
Yes.
No. No.
That's what I said.
They not have neshama. They have a nefesh. Okay, and when you get to that, what is the difference between neshama and a nefesh? So simply speaking, I guess on a very casual term, they're all called neshamas. Like, so we use that as a generic term for souls. But neshama is actually a level within the soul. The soul actually has 5 parts to it, 5 levels to it. In ascending order, it is nefesh. Nefesh translates as like the vital soul, or primal soul. It's what prompts us to eat, to drink, to sleep, procreate, all of our physical needs. Then there's ruach, translates loosely as spirit. Neshama, the one you just spoke about. And then there's 2 higher levels called chai and yechida, which are not actually manifest within the body. They remain suspended on high, part of your soul, but it's sort of where your mazel, talk about mazel, your Jewish, that's where your mazel really is. So what happens at times, sometimes when God gives us a particular blessing, we ask God, I need to win the lottery, or whatever blessings you're asking for. And it doesn't magically always happen exactly the way I asked. You see, God, he's not listening. I asked God 15,000 times. He just doesn't hear me. What happened? Well, am I that bad that God doesn't listen? The answer is no, not at all. Many times these blessings get stuck, so to speak, in your muzzle. There's part of you, but the remaining is suspended spiritually on high, and one needs to do something to sort of bring them down into the physical world, into your conscious level of living, which is where the Rebbe would come in, and the Rebbe would tell somebody who, God forbid, let's say is infertile or sick, do A, B, C, or D, check your film, put on your mezuzah, whatever it is, which seems to have nothing to do with anything, and somehow that opens up the magical, conduit for the blessings. So a Rebbe is able to connect the dots. I don't have to connect the dot book, none of us do, but they are all interconnected. So going back to the Jewish person, every Jewish person, whether you're a wicked, whether you're a tzaddik, doesn't matter. You have 2 different neshamas. As it says, there's a verse that's, that says, neshamas ani asisi. God says, and I have made souls in the plural. That's what the actual pasuk, the verse in Isaiah says. So what does it mean? I've made souls. Obviously, that's plural. It's not singular. Nefesh achas mitzad klipa. I'm sorry. Shehein shtei nefashes. So what are the 2 souls? Nefesh achas mitzad klipa sitrach v'im sabesh shtam mar lachis aguf k'tsev nefesh shabbat shabbatam he menabas kamei yisay yisay marvi yisay sarat shabbat. You got that? Good. Okay. So chapter 1, and we're getting closer to the conclusion of chapter 1. Can I get extra 5 minutes because some other rabbi came in and chewed up 5 minutes of my time, paid me $4 and took it back. It's for the record. Okay. And these are terms that you need to get used to because they're going to be brought down in Tanya extensively. One soul comes from the side what's called klipa. Klipa translates literally as a shell. What does a shell do? What does a shell of a nut, shell of a fruit do? Right, it acts as a form of protection, right? It conceals ultimately, but it protects what's there. But in this case in particular, it conceals what's inside it. So it can be the shell of a nut, it could be the peel of a fruit. It's concealing what's there. That's klipa. Klipa in and of itself, in this case, is not a good thing. It acts as a form of concealing godliness. Okay? So one of our souls, the animal soul within the Jew, comes from the side of klipa and sitra achra. Sitra achra literally means the other side. Other meaning other opposite side of holiness. So all of our temptations, our desire for evil or whatever it may be, comes from that side. It's not coming from the godly soul. Your neshama has no interest in sinning, 0. And it has no interest in your eating, drinking, sleeping, as it doesn't connect itself at all to the physical world. All of your neshama's desires are to serve God. Torah mitzvahs, that's it. Everything else comes from this other soul. So that other soul, though, comes from klipa, as we're going to see shortly. All right, so he says, where is that klipa manifest? Where is that soul, the animal soul or vital soul manifest? I mentioned it before. It's in your heart. Which side of your heart? It's 50-50. The left side is the correct side. Right. Why the left side? Just from a physiological standpoint. It's actually, if you know a little about your circulatory system, it's the left side of the heart, and there's blood on both sides of the heart, okay? But it's the left side that basically pumps it forth, and it circulates through the body, comes back to the right ventricle. But it's the left side, which is the source, so to speak, of the blood, which ultimately sustains the body, as anybody well knows, that if blood is not reaching a part of the body, a physical body, then that limb, or God forbid, dies at some point. It withers away. because it's what brings all the everything in the oxygen, nutrients, whatever it is, goes through the blood system stream. So as that exists in the physical realm, it also exists in the spiritual realm. Your animal / vital soul, kind of one and the same, lives, so to speak. Again, it's a spiritual entity. It does not show up on an angiogram or EKG, what have you, but it's there. Is on the left side of the heart, because that's the place basically where the blood of a person is pumped forth from, and that's where basically what sustains and vitalizes the body. Umimena boys, and it's from that soul, your animal / vital soul, that all of a person's evil traits come. And they are ultimately related to what's called the Arba Yesod Yisrael, the 4 elements of evil. What are the 4 elements of evil? So simply speaking, on a physical level, strictly physical level, there are, and they exist, again, both in physical and spiritual, there are 4 elements basically from which the world is made, simply speaking. Although science will have a little more to say about this. So don't contradict me, because I left my PhD at home. But you basically have Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar. Eish is fire, or subsets of fire. Ruach is air, okay, and the like. Eish, Ruach, Mayim is water, and Afar is earth, dirt, what have you. So out of those 4 different categories, if you will, in some way, shape, or form, matter exists, okay, in some way, shape, or form, either a combination of them or alone, etc. That's on a physical level. But on a metaphysical level, spiritual level, these are also the sources of some of our evil traits that exist within ourselves. Namely, anger and boastfulness, haughtiness. Of those 4 I just mentioned, which one do you think is most closely related to anger? Let's say anger in particular. Fire, right? Your temper flares. Why do we say that? Okay, there's a reason for it. Because actually, spiritually speaking, it comes from that element of fire. When it comes to pleasures of life, things that I enjoy, my pleasures of life, they would be most closely associated with which of the 4 elements? Water. Why water? Because ultimately it's through water that everything can grow. Without water, things don't exist. Nothing exists, really. I mean, we couldn't exist. Now, when it comes to silliness, mockery, boasting, or other worthless discussions, where would they come from? Air. You're full of hot air, right? It's starting to all make sense? Come from air. And then laziness and depression come from the negative side of the element of earth. Why? Because earth is heavy, right? Of those, it's heavy, it keeps you down. When a person is lazy or depressed or what have you, they can't move. So the gam midas tevis should be solved. And even it says the positive temperaments with which the Talmud testifies that all of us naturally have as Jews, which are that of compassion and generosity, Rahmanut, as it's called in Hebrew, and Gemilas Chasan, acts of kindness, also stem from the animal soul. Although ultimately they come from sort of the good side of the animal. The animal soul, man, we'll learn it a little later, but has good sides and evil sides, etc. Like anything else, it can be used out in a positive way or in a negative way. So I'm just going to go back to the klipa part. I think I'm going to hold it here because actually almost finished the first chapter. You got a few more minutes? It's a definite maybe? Okay. So it says that when it comes, remember we spoke about this concept of the shell, the klipa. It's an important term to remember. There are 2 different types of klipa. One of them is what's called klipas noiga. Literally, I guess loosely you translate sort of as the neutral klipa. Remember, klipa in and of itself is not good. It conceals godliness. But there's a level of klipa which is an admixture of good and bad. Meaning that if, for example, the desire to eat kosher food, you want to get a kosher steak. You say, well, what's wrong with the kosher steak? Short of the price, which can, put you back a few weeks. But other than that, what's wrong with it? I want to eat. I want to have a nice bottle of wine, kosher wine. It's all good and fine. What's wrong with that? So the question is, why am I eating it? Or why am I drinking it? Am I eating the meat because I'm a glutton and I just can't get enough meat in my life? Or I'm drinking wine like a drunkard? then obviously that's not coming from a good side. It's this neutral sort of, it's all kosher, but all I'm eating it or drinking it for is basically to feed my passions and my desires. At which point, at least temporarily, it descends into the world of impurity until a person does teshuvah. On the other hand, let's say I have a temptation, I want to eat non-kosher meat of whatever disliking a person may have. Starts with a B, A, C, O, N, for example. Okay, non-kosher bacon, that is, not the fake bacon, they call it, whatever it is. Okay, and with not kosher. So, or not kosher wine. So, a person, wow, I mean, hungry and I can't eat eggs without that. It doesn't taste the same. My morning doesn't get going, etc. It's all there was to eat. So, but I made a blessing on it and I put on a black cat and a gargle. And before I ate it, it went like this. So, obviously, God must have elevated it. The answer is no. You cannot spiritually elevate with all the brachas in the world something that initially comes from what's called the shalosh klipot hatmeis, the 3 klipot shells of impurity. They're not the admixture of good and bad. They're abject impurity / evil. So anything which is forbidden for a Jew comes from that world. And we're going to speak more about that as we move along. So again, 2 levels of klipa. One is the more admixture of the good and bad called klipat noga. And the other one is the shalosh klipot hatmeis, the 3 klipot of impurity from which I give you one example, which is out of Chazar, what have you, or any illicit, intimate relationship. They can say, well, I mean, we're not married, we're single, it doesn't matter. It matters. As we'll see further on. All these things that are forbidden based on Torah come from 3 klipot of impurity and cannot be elevated for all intents and purposes. Even with teshuvah, not so simple. It's not like say, okay, God, I'll never do it again, at least today, okay? I mean, I'm serious, God. I'm really not going to do it again today. Hopefully not tomorrow, too. That's not absolute tshuva. That's, I'm feeling bad for the moment, and then once the fires get reignited, I get moving again. Okay, you know what? I think I'm going to hold it here. I didn't finish the whole chapter. Almost finished the chapter, but I don't want to ram through the last part and not do it justice. So we leave it on that note. We have a godly soul, an animal soul. Now we get into sort of the meat and potatoes a little bit. Okay, we have an animal soul, a godly soul. We're focusing in on the Beinoni. The Beinoni, again, is obviously not somebody who is half good, half bad. And in particular, as we'll see, ultimately, what is a Beinoni? I'm going to give you a heads up, okay? What is the Beinoni? The Beinoni is actually someone who doesn't sin. Now imagine that. That they actually have full control over their thought, speech, and action. It doesn't mean they're not tempted, because they still have an evil inclination. They're not a tzaddik. A tzaddik already transformed the evil inclination into good. The Beinoni still has both. But basically, the moment, the evil inclination comes to your house, who's there? It's evil inclination. So sometimes we just, out of curiosity, I just want to open the door a crack. I'm not really going to let you in the house, but just, I want to be impolite, So open the door a little bit, and before you know it, the evil inclination got its foot in the door, can't close the door anymore. It's not nice to close the door with someone's foot anyway, especially if it's your own evil inclination. So you open it up, you invite him in for a little coffee and tea. We're not really going to do anything. We're just going to talk, in a dialogue. And before you know it, all of a sudden the evil inclination takes over the house and you've been evicted. That's sort of what's, okay? Fast forward. So the Beinoni, the moment the evil inclination knocks on the door, it's not an example brought down to Tanya, okay? He doesn't even answer the door. He doesn't even answer the door once. To that degree, that's the degree that a Beinoni has in terms of control. I'm going to conclude with the following quick test. This is the conclusion of the conclusion. And I've done this with high school girls on a regular basis. You know what a pink elephant is? Okay, have you ever seen a pink elephant? Not recently. Some people weren't sure. I want to be sure. Are we all on the same page here? Well, if you did see one, where did you see the pink? Okay, but a pink elephant would really stand out. If you went to the zoo and you saw a bunch of elephants, the elephant family, the Cohens, the Freeds, the Jewish elephants, obviously, and one was pink. It was really be odd. If you walk down the street and saw a pink elephant walking down Walnut, you had so much to drink. It's just straight up, right? So what I would do with the girls is I would tell them, I want to give you some semblance of what it's like to try to control your mind. You can't shut your mind off. Even when you're sleeping, you're constantly thinking. Right? If you shut your mind off,
he's concluding.
There's no reset button. It's over. Okay.
You can shuffle the cards.
You can shuffle the cards. That's it. So the question is, what do I do? How do I? And a Beinoni has full control over his thoughts. There's never evil thoughts, illicit thoughts, immoral thoughts coming into his brain. How do you do that? And how difficult is it? So I tell him all about the pink elephant. For 2 minutes, I'm talking about pink elephants. So I'm going to go 60 seconds now on my stopwatch. I don't want you to think about what? The pink elephant. No thinking about a pink elephant for 60 seconds. You hear me? All right? When I start counting, 1, 2, 3, no more pink elephant. 1, 2, 3. I don't think one girl ever made it to 60 seconds. Not a one. Okay. Some made it to 30, 40, which were really the Tzaddikisin who had like amazing self-control. So imagine the Bainani, though, when you did this game with him and he doesn't think about the pink elephant. Forget the 60 seconds at all because it's forbidden. We use that as an illustration. That's in the world of thought. The same thing when it comes to the world of speech, never speaking slander, etc., forbidden speech, and a little more so when it comes to action. Now, you might say it's easier for me to control my actions. To a degree, that's true, than my thoughts, because my thoughts are my thoughts. As long as no one else knows what I'm thinking, we're good, right? God forbid they should only know what I think of them, that kind of thing. As long as I'm nice on the outside, I'm cordial, whatever the story may be. The Beni really has full control along those lines. And that really, in essence, as we'll see, is a level that we can all certainly aspire to and, in essence, reach if we really work hard on ourselves, even if we're not going to become a true Beni. But at the very least, it gives us some inkling as to what goes on, the internal struggles, okay? And this all plays into where anxiety comes from and depression and all the rest of the stuff all fits neatly into this whole package of the daily struggle. Go out there and do the right thing. Make it work. Until next week. All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.